Gmar Chatzima Tova. It was the day before Yom Kippur in 1964, and a deeply pious, traditionally observant rabbi was not in his study preparing his notes, not in synagogue preparing his soul, not at home spending time with his family, but at the Vatican. And he was there in secret, skipping his favorite kosher restaurant in Rome, staying home from synagogue on Shabbat, hiding away in his hotel room to make sure he wouldn't be spotted. This is the story of Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, one of the leading Jewish theologians and philosophers of the 20th century. Born in 1907 in a Hasidic community in Warsaw and escaping to the U.S. just in the nick of time in 1940, a self-described brand plucked from the fire, Heschel was the preeminent Jewish scholar and rabbi of his time. So what could have possibly moved him to spend the day before Yom Kippur at the Vatican? We will return to Heschel and his secret mission shortly. But before we can understand what was going on in his time, we need to look at our own. I want to share with you two snapshots in the form of two coffee conversations I have had over the past few months. The first was with a 20-something woman of our congregation who shared with me a story from her work. This young woman wanted to start a Jewish affinity group at her tech company, just like the many other affinity groups the company has. But when she brought up the idea, the HR representative said, "I just wouldn't feel comfortable starting a Jewish affinity group right now, given what Israel is doing in Gaza." I sat with this young woman and processed with her the antisemitism she had experienced. Israel's actions in Gaza, love them or hate them, have absolutely nothing to do with Jewish employees at an American tech company wanting a space for themselves as a minority group. Venting her frustration, she said to me, "I have had enough of these kinds of comments. At this point, I'm done with non-Jewish friends." A week later, at a coffee shop on the very same street, I had a very different conversation, this time with a young man in his 20s. He wanted to talk about the upcoming mayoral election and his excitement about Zoran Mamdani. He shared with me that his Instagram newsfeed is filled with his friends posting in support of Mamdani, and he wholeheartedly agrees. His policies, his youthful energy, his fresh ideas, his bold commitment to equality, his progressive values, all of this has this young man excited to cast his vote. "I do know, Rabbi," he said to me, "that he's anti-Semitic." I listened quietly. He continued, "At first, I wanted not to believe that he harbors hatred towards Jews because I am so enamored with him as a candidate. But as I have seen and heard more, I am disappointed to admit that, whether he realizes it or not, he's anti-Semitic. I wish he weren't. But that doesn't change my vote. My progressive politics are my priority." This is the moment we are living in. I raise these 2 cups of coffee not because they're comprehensive, but because each one signals a sentiment, and together they signal the inflection point in which we live. These 2 conversations could not have been more different, and yet they boil down to the same issue: a rapid rise in a new kind of anti-Semitism, a covert, under-the-radar, almost casual anti-Semitism. Not the violent attack type of anti-Semitism, but the offhand comment that the Jewish person who was attacked might have deserved it because Jews are a genocidal people or because Jews have too much power and control. These are statements that have not in recent history been acceptable to utter in polite society. Now they have become not just tolerable, but pervasive. And though these 2 conversations I described were with young people, this is not only a young person's problem. It is all of our problem. We are not the first Jews to experience this climate. These same forces were present in Heschel's time. It was the 60s. The trauma of the Holocaust was still fresh. And as young people in the US rebelled against the Vietnam War, an anti-Zionist movement arose as well. This generation saw Israel's wars for survival as aggression and Israel's existence as colonialism. From Israel's founding in 1948 up to this point, Israel had been a source of pride for American Jews, a refuge after the Holocaust. But by the mid-60s, with the backdrop of Vietnam, there were a growing number of Jews, especially young intellectuals, who were anti-Zionist and for whom Jewish identity meant little to nothing. It's a story we are not unfamiliar with. Then it was not Israel's war with Hamas that was labeled as militarism as opposed to survival, but Israel's threats from its neighbors, culminating in the Six-Day War. It was not a presidential administration in general that Americans were rebelling against, but the Vietnam War. The parallels between then and now are striking. And in those days, as is still the case today, there was anti-Semitism lurking beneath the surface. That was the time in which Heschel was living. After losing much of his family in the Holocaust, he had every reason to put his head down and shields up. But instead, he became friends with a Catholic cardinal named Augustin Bia, to whom Pope John had entrusted the plan for a declaration to be written regarding Catholic-Jewish relations. Which brings us back to the day before Yom Kippur in 1964 and Heschel's secret mission to the Vatican. It was the morning of September 14th, the day when the third session of the Second Vatican Council would meet, the purpose of which was, in large part, to update the Church's policies towards Jews. It was to be a major turning point in Catholic-Jewish relations, and the Jewish community was eager. Heschel had met many times with Cardinal Bia to share the Jewish hopes for the council. 2 weeks before this third session, the Jewish section of the draft document for the council was leaked to the New York Herald Tribune, and it included a call for proselytizing to Jews, a theological belief that all Jews must one day become Christians. The Jewish community was furious and fearful. Heschel went straight to his friend, Cardinal Bia, and other Catholic leaders with his harsh rebuke. Particularly striking was his bold assertion, "As I have repeatedly stated to leading personalities of the Vatican, I am ready to go to Auschwitz any time if faced with the alternative of conversion or death." That was how deeply Heschel valued his Judaism. He faced criticism from wide segments of the Jewish community for his candid remarks and willingness to engage at all in the council's process. But that did not deter him. He pulled the last lever he could, requesting an audience with the Pope. The request was granted, and the meeting was set for the morning of September 14th, just hours before the council would convene, and just one day before Yom Kippur. Heschel anxiously made the case to the Pope to remove this infuriating and dangerous passage from the document. In the end, the fourth and final session of the Second Vatican Council voted, on October 28, 1965, to adopt the final version, which successfully removed the language Heschel advocated against. It was a landmark victory for the Jewish people. For the first time, the Catholic Church formally repudiated anti-Semitism and rejected the assertion that the Jews killed Jesus. This major turning point in Catholic-Jewish relations was 60 years ago this month. It is an anniversary very much worthy of celebration and gratitude. 60 years later, as I reflect on that instrumental pre-Yom Kippur meeting at the Vatican, I am struck by what a powerful example Heschel set, not just for the Jews of his time, but for our time, for the 2 people I had coffee with, and for each one of us. When it came to combating anti-Semitism, Heschel did 3 things that we would be wise to emulate today. The first, and perhaps the most obvious, is that he lived a proud Jewish life. He wrote books about God and Torah and Israel. He was politically active, first to push the U.S. to help the Jews of Europe, and then later on behalf of Soviet Jewry. He taught at Hebrew Union College and the Jewish Theological Seminary, and he walked the walk, inviting rabbinical students over to his home for Shabbat meals and taking every opportunity for Torah study. His daughter Susanna referred to him as lovingly observant, in that he lived his life by Jewish law, but did so with joy, beauty, and love. In his 1939 article on return, he wrote, "We have been challenged by the darkest powers, and no indignity could be more shameful than crawling away. What is our answer? The answer to expulsion is return, to the Jewish community, to the Jewish spirit, to the Jewish land." He knew that the counter to anti-Semitism was to do Jewish, and to do Jewish even more than before. We must follow Heschel's example and strengthen our Jewish identity. Because if Judaism doesn't mean much to us, then what is the point of fighting to preserve it? We have to host Shabbat dinners, attend Jewish lectures, invest in Jewish communities, celebrate Jewish holidays, read Jewish books, and visit Jewish sites when we travel. We also have to be informed. We have to know our own Jewish history, the history of the state of Israel, and what's going on now, which means reading the news from multiple reputable outlets. We do not have the luxury of tuning out. We also do not have the luxury of prioritizing other identities ahead of our Jewish identity, and that includes when we show up at the ballot box. Heschel devoted much of his time and energy to social justice and progressive causes, and he did so not in spite of his Jewish identity, but because of it, which means never did he support a cause that included Jew hatred in its platform. To combat anti-Semitism, Heschel would say, we must be proud of our Judaism and strengthen Jewish life. The second essential lesson we should learn from Heschel's example is the paramount importance of interfaith relationships. Cardinal Augustin Bia is just one example of Heschel's many non-Jewish friends. Because of Heschel's deep commitment to racial justice, he formed close personal friendships with Dr. King and Congressman John Lewis. He also became friends with Protestant theologians Reinhold Niebuhr and John Coleman Bennett, which landed Heschel a visiting professor position at Union Theological Seminary, making him the first Jew to receive this honor. He had Jesuit priest friends and Catholic bishop friends. I say friends rather than acquaintances or colleagues, because it is not merely that Heschel crossed paths with these religious leaders, or exchanged letters with them, or had sporadic conversations with them. Heschel became close, personal friends with many, many non-Jews. They delved into their differing beliefs and found common ground, getting to know one another on a deep personal level. We need to follow Heschel's example. After October 7th, many of us were disappointed in not having allies the way we thought we would. We felt and still feel abandoned by our non-Jewish friends. The impulse is to retreat in, deciding not to waste our time with interfaith efforts anymore. But that is not the Heschel way. He would say that we need to double down on our interfaith relationships and understanding, to realize that perhaps the relationships we had were superficial and we can strengthen them. That also means that our interfaith relationships must not be one-sided, solely for the purpose of accumulating allies. Heschel marched with Dr. King in Selma, not because he wanted to gain an ally for himself, but because it was a moral imperative to be an ally for the Black community. Forming genuine friendships with non-Jews means that the relationships are mutual. We can show up as allies for others when needed, and we can count on them to show up for us too. What made Heschel truly unique in his fight against anti-Semitism was that he did not just have a strong Jewish core, and he did not just build bridges with non-Jews. He combined the two. Which brings us to the third and arguably most important way that Heschel fought anti-Semitism: his fierce advocacy on behalf of the Jewish people, just one example of which was his secret mission to the Vatican. As Heschel himself put it, the first and most important prerequisite of interfaith is faith. It is only out of the depth of involvement in the unending drama that began with Abraham that we can help one another toward an understanding of our situation. Interfaith must come out of depth, not out of a void absence of faith. It is not an enterprise for those who are half-learned or spiritually immature. It is in the combination of strengthening Jewish identity and building bridges with non-Jews that we find our secret sauce in combating anti-Semitism. We will know our history, know what is going on, know what is real and what is not, and then be in a position to share it with our non-Jewish friends. We may not have the platform or access Heschel had, but if every single one of us was Jewishly knowledgeable and committed enough and interpersonally connected enough to speak up in the face of anti-Semitism, imagine the good we could do. These 3 action items are not just abstract ideas. I encourage you to make them a priority in the new year, and we at Park Avenue Synagogue are here to give you the tools. We have Shabbat dinners, speakers, classes, religious services, and more. So many opportunities to strengthen and prioritize your Jewish identity. And we will be inviting in clergy from local Upper East Side non-Jewish houses of worship, beginning on Friday, November 7th, with Pastor Aaron Janklow from Madison Avenue Presbyterian Church. Their community will be invited to join us for the service as well, and we hope you come and meet them and hear from Pastor Janklow. We are invited to St. Ignatius Loyola on November 20th when I will be speaking, and we can meet their community. After Mitzvah Day on November 23rd, we will be inviting a few local churches to join with us in an afternoon park cleanup, a great way to get to know someone while working together. In March, we are hosting an iftar dinner, the breakfast meal during Ramadan, with Peace Islands, a Muslim organization. Also in the spring, we are joining with Brick Church for an interfaith concert where I will be speaking and our cantors will be singing at the church. And there will be more. My hope is not just that you will attend one of these interfaith events, but that you will use them as an opportunity to talk to someone and plan to meet up for coffee the next week and really get to know one another. It would not be following Heschel's example if we only developed our interfaith relationships to a superficial level. And then it will be up to you to take your activism to Heschel's 3rd level, combining the two and speaking up in the face of anti-Semitism. It is only with this most important piece that the rest can be effective. 60 years after the historic Second Vatican Council, it is now our turn to take our fate into our own hands. To my 2 coffee dates, to each of you in this room, to every Jew in the world, none of us is excused from this sacred calling. Only then can we ensure that under the radar anti-Semitism is under the radar no more, that polite anti-Semitism is polite no more. And one day, please God, that anti-Semitism itself is no more. Gmar Chatima Tova.
Thank you for joining the Park Avenue Synagogue family. I hope you enjoyed the sermon. Please consider supporting our online community by scanning the QR code or by going to supportpas.org or by making a donation. Shalom and see you in shul.